Why, hello there. Are you here to listen to a scary story? Perhaps you just happen to stumble upon my channel. Well, my name is DANIEDREADFUL, and that's what I do here. I tell creepypasta, true horror, and sometimes I even sprinkle in some classics. Now, if that all sounds good to you, why not stay and hit that subscribe button? If you're already subscribed, welcome back, my beautiful creepy people. Tonight, we're diving into the darker corners of reality, where the scariest stories aren't from movies, they're real. From the eerie crunch of footsteps beneath a childhood treehouse to strange happenings in an old Burlington store, these true tales will make you question what's lurking in the dark. So without further ado, grab your blankets, grab your whiskey, wine, or coffee, whichever you prefer, and let's get into these terrifying true stories from Reddit. There is a local folklore about the man-eating demons called Beital, ghouls, in our village. It is said that they live in graveyards and eat the flesh of dead humans who didn't live a righteous life. But sometimes they take form of a beautiful woman or a crying child to attract people at night and eat them alive. It's a pretty well-known story. We have been hearing it since childhood. Though I personally didn't believe it, jinns exist, but they can't hurt humans in normal circumstances. One day, I went to see a performance in a neighboring village with my friend Armand, not his real name. By the time the performance ended, it was almost midnight. We started coming back home. On the way back, we had to cross an old graveyard. It was one of the biggest paranormal hotspots in our village. We were talking about the performance the whole time until we reached the graveyard. Both of us became silent. We have crossed this road many times, but never this late at night. Our body felt heavy as we crossed it. Every noise felt paranormal. Each step felt slower than the last. Suddenly, we heard a faint noise. As we walked down the road, the sound became louder and clearer. It was the cry of a child. Of course, we just had to run into a ghoul. I felt like crying. I looked beside me. Armand was just as scared. The most terrifying thing is the fact that we heard it means it already knows about our presence. As we slowly went closer to the sound, we saw a child about 2 years old crying beside the road. We did not approach it. We didn't even look directly at it. As we walked by it, my eyes started tearing up. Each and every cell in my body told me to run. I barely managed to keep my sanity. I would have probably passed out if I was alone. As we went past it, the crying became louder and louder, to the point I felt like my eardrum would burst. Once we were about 20 meters away from it, the crying stopped. I could no longer control my body. I ended up looking back, and I saw nothing. It was gone. There wasn't any sign of it around. I took a deep breath. My heart felt lighter. Armand looked at me. He was also relieved. But before we could say a single sentence, we heard a demonic scream. It came from the graveyard. That was the last straw. We ran as fast as we could. I could feel my consciousness slipping away. We did not stop running until we reached our village. There were a few people sitting beside a campfire playing cards. The moment we saw them, I became unconscious. I wake up in my grandparents' home. Armand had already woken up. He told them everything. I confirmed his claims. We saw a Beital. We really did. Some believed us and some didn't. I got an earful from my grandmother. Well, it's been 3 years since that incident. We still talk about it when I go back to the village during vacations. I still wonder what would have happened if I had been alone at that time. Maybe I wouldn't be here telling you guys this incident. But one thing is for sure, I'm never using that road at night, ever again. When I was around 9 years old, my parents built me and my twin brother a treehouse. We lived in a very rural town in Washington state on 5 acres of land. The house and lawns took up about 2 acres of land, and the other 3 were woods. The treehouse sat in the middle of these woods that was hidden away from the trail inside the woods. It was a basic treehouse, nothing too fancy, but to my brother and I, it was the coolest thing in the world. We always wanted to sleep in the treehouse. But because it was in thick woods quite a ways from the house, My parents said no, but when we were 11 years old, they finally said yes, after we kept begging them. My brother and I gathered up some comic books, DSs, flashlights, and sleeping bags, and headed out to the treehouse after dinner. Washington summer evenings are pretty comfortable, so we weren't too worried about getting cold and were more focused on having fun in the treehouse than anything else. We set up our bags in there and began playing Pokemon on our DSs and having a good time. As it was getting darker, we switched on our flashlights and read our comic books. The treehouse door had 2 latches to keep the door shut while it got windy, 1 latch on the outside and 1 on the inside. As we got into our bags, I latched the door shut so that it didn't blow open in the middle of the night. I don't remember what time it was, but I woke up to the sound of crunching on the ground below us. I sat up and listened to my surroundings, making sure I wasn't hearing things. I kept hearing the crunching below the treehouse. I woke my brother up and whispered that I hear crunching. He reached for his flashlight, but I stopped him. We sat in the pitch dark, listening. It seemed that the noise had stopped. He whispered back that it was probably coyotes and that we're fine. Not 30 seconds later, we hear the ladder to the treehouse creak with the weight of someone climbing up. Then, the door tried to be pushed open, but luckily the latch was set and the door stayed closed. A huge thud came from the other side of the door, along sounds of cracking wood. We stayed quiet, too scared to make a sound. The next sound we heard was a thump on the ground, sounding like someone jumping off the last bit of the ladder, and footsteps walking away. After what felt like hours, but was probably minutes, we got the courage to bolt back to the house. Leaving everything but the DSs, even though we were scared out of our minds, we both wanted to make sure our DSs were safe, especially since I had finally caught Palkia and my brother caught Dialga. We made it back to the house in 2 minutes, running the fastest we have ever ran before. The walk to the treehouse takes about 5 minutes from the back door, so the run back in 2 minutes was impressive for us. We grabbed the key under the pot and opened the back door, locking it behind us. We both went into our room, finally feeling safe. We didn't want to tell our parents what had happened, because we didn't want Mom to say, "I told you so," and not allow us back there. The next week, as we were in the post office with our mom, our neighbor who lived down the road from us walked in. As my mom and the neighbor got to talking, he told her that last week he found a very thin, greasy, disheveled man in his shed. My neighbor's dog had apparently seen the man go into the shed and was barking at the shed. When my neighbor went to go check it out, he found the man in there, holding a rusty old knife. Luckily, my neighbor had brought out his hunting rifle to check it out, and the man dropped the knife. The cops were called and the man was taken away. I believe that the disheveled man was what was on the other side of the treehouse door, looking for a place to probably sleep that summer night. After that incident, we didn't play at the treehouse as much and only went into the woods when it was light out. And we always took a knife with us from that point on. A Burlington Haunting. Dyer Street in El Paso has a history of violence, drugs, sex, and death. Ask anyone in El Paso about Dyer, and I guarantee they have a story about the Devil's Triangle or the Econo Lodge. So it makes sense that the store I work at is most likely haunted. I work at Burlington, but it wasn't always a Burlington. It used to be a big Kmart till they closed it down in 2017 and opened up a strip mall there. All the people that have been there since it opened in 2022 have stories of stuff falling over and footsteps being heard, but I chalked it up to the building settling or something being off balance and falling. It wasn't until last week when I started to think otherwise. So I'm closing on Black Friday, which for Burlington isn't a big deal because we don't have any sales. I mean, come on, it's already a discount store. Regardless of that info though, the store was still packed to the gills with people doing their early Christmas shopping. It's a little past 8 p.m., and I'm helping a family take one of those little vehicles that kids can ride around to their truck. When I walk back in the store, I get a call on the radio that one of the closed-off fitting rooms has been opened. Now, that thing is locked up good, so I'm thinking some kids must have been yanking the doorknob or pushing down on it and broke it. When I go check it out, the doorknob is fine and no one is inside. I look back up and go back to helping up front. About 20 minutes later, I hear something fall behind me. I look back and see that a Santa Claus lawn statue had fallen over. I didn't think anything of it when I picked it up. When I set it back in place, a stuffed snowman, which was sitting on the top shelf, fell in front of me and set off the touchlights we had on the jewelry. I stepped back to see if anyone had bumped into the shelves, but it was just me there. I was a little freaked out at this point and took a couple steps away from that shelf. That's when the lights on the jewelry started going flashing on. Now, these lights don't just turn on unless you tap the boxes the jewelry is in. They blink a few times at random, then stop completely. Before I can process what I'm seeing, the doors behind me, which are automatic doors, start to open and close without anyone walking by them. They open and close 3 times before it all stops. No more blinking lights, doors are acting normally, and nothing is falling over anymore. I tell my supervisor about it when she walks by and she goes, "Oh, it must be the Kmart ghost again," and walks away with a light giggle. Nothing else happened the rest of the night, but every night I've worked since, something has fallen over without anyone around, and my other coworkers have said they've heard noises in the closed-off fitting rooms. Unexplained ghost sighting at the Hollybourne House on Jekyll Island, Georgia. Somebody started a thread about what made you realize you were seeing some sort of intelligent entity. That got me thinking about this. I posted it as a comment there, but honestly was curious if anybody else had any experiences at the Hollybourne House on Jekyll Island, or knew of them or heard stories of people who had something similar like this happen to them there. This is a bit of a long story, so bear with me. When I was young, I spent the night at my best friend's house with my sister. She lived on Jekyll Island, Georgia. It's known for having turn-of-the-century mansions on it because in the early 1900s, a bunch of rich people built houses there as vacation homes. They have most of them to where you can do tours and walk through them now. There is one that's not. The adults said it was more for structural issues, but of course everyone said it was haunted, and it had a crazy story, untrue, about a witch that lived there at one point. It was called the Hollybourne. Our friend's mom said that she would let us walk around the ground outside of it the next day. And the night before we went to get food, she drove past the house. There were some weird lights on that we couldn't quite figure what it was. And being a 12-year-old middle schooler, I was a jerk and made fun of my friend and sister when they freaked out about it. Easy to be some sort of coincidence, right? Next day, friend's mom drives us to the house again. My sister was over it and said she was staying in the car. My friend and I got out and started walking around. Almost immediately, I saw a figure in the window. It looks like a girl or a small woman. I also kept seeing weird flashes of light out of the corner of my eye, but I wasn't gonna say anything. I just made fun of those the night before, right? My friend and I walked around the house. I keep seeing flashes of white light out of the corner of my eye. I ignore them and keep my mouth shut. When we get to the front again, my friend stops, looks at the house, and then looks at me. She then says, "Do you see that little girl in the window?" Now I'm like, okay, I'm not the only one seeing this. We go to the car and point it out to my sister. She can see it, friends. Mom is messing with something in the front seat. Of course, we're all freaking out and telling her to look. Now here's the part where I can tell it was an intelligent entity. When my friend's mom went to look at it, it literally faded away and disappeared. She then looked away and it came back. We all start freaking out again and tell her to look up, and she whips her head around and it fades away again. But she is able to at least see something that fades away, she tells us. We have her do this a few more times, and every time she goes to look, it fades away, and then comes back when she looks away. At this point, my friend's mom is like, "Well, that's our cue to go home," and we leave. Never went back. Probably should have tried to see if I could have it happen again. The only way I can think that could have possibly not been some paranormal entity was if somebody had some sort of special effects display or something and somehow was watching us and was making it fade away whenever Nan's mom went to look, which would be highly unlikely. It's not like it was a scheduled tour group. Nobody knew we were going to go over there and walk around. So yeah, never found out what it was, but it's a fun story to tell every once in a while.